Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be getting back into the Spawn WildC.A.T.S crossover miniseries with Devil Day number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in March of 1996, I'd like to start off by saying that for whatever reason, I'm not really that big a fan of this cover, despite the fact that there's nothing wrong with it. You've got several characters from the story: Maul, 2015 Grifter, 90s Zealot, Warblade, Spawn from the 90s. All these characters are in the story. Everything about this cover fits in with the tone of the story, but it just feels, I don't know, kind of generic, as in like, hey, here's just some of the characters on, explosion quote unquote background with stuff coming at them from, the perimeter of the shot. Again, there's nothing bad about it. It just feels so lackluster for some reason. I can't really put my finger on it. On the inside of the front cover, instead of getting the credits for the book, we get an advertisement, because this is the point in which Wildstorm, for whatever reason, was printing all of the credits at the end of the book, which I don't particularly care for, but it was their prerogative. The ad is for Wildstorm Set 2 Chromium trading cards. Now, I've talked in the past of why I don't really care for Chromium trading cards. I feel the Chromium just obscures the artwork that's being depicted, especially given that in a trading card format, usually the detail in the artwork is already suffering because of how small the format is. And, dumping the Chromium in on top of it, I feel like just compounds that issue. I'm cool with like 1 or 2 cards in the set being Chromium, and they're rare and you got to find them, and that's all fun. But to make the whole set Chromium, I feel, is just kind of a waste in terms of, what you're actually getting from it. But those are just my opinions. Getting back into the story, we see that Santini is narrating the forces that are all coming together to join in the final assault on the Red House, aka the Chrysler Building. We see the Coda assassins solidifying a new blood pact. We then see the Vampire Triad, who are lighting candles in honor of their leaders, the Blood Queen and Heartless John. And we then see the Black Razors getting all of their weapons ready as they all join together to make their final push to take down the Ipsissimus, aka Spawn of 2015. And I really still don't like that name, Ipsissimus. For whatever reason, I never cared for it. I feel like it doesn't do anything at all for the character. We then see all of our heroes gathered around the base of the Chrysler Building as they prepare for their own assault as the acting vanguard. Both of the Zealots, along with Tapestry and Spawn, enter the sewers so that they can attack the building from below. Void, 2015 Spartan, Voodoo, and Maul are all teleported using Void's powers to the middle levels of the building to attack from there, whereas Spartan, both of the Grifters, and Warblade attack from the uppermost levels to create a 3-pronged attack that can potentially catch everyone off guard. Now, I have a lot of problems with what's going on here. First and foremost, vertical layout. Many of you know, if you've been watching my content for any time, I don't care for this. For 2 reasons. Number 1, I have to change the orientation of the comic book when I'm reading it. And 2, I'm not really set up to film vertical layouts like this, and I'm not changing my whole setup to accommodate something that only happens randomly in comic books. But more importantly, from a story aspect, there's a lot of problems going on just these 2 pages. For instance, we see 2015 Grifter is flying. Why? I don't know. Grifter doesn't have the power of flight. And then we also see Tapestry flying as well. Now, this could be because she has magical powers and is using them to levitate, but if that's the case, then can someone please explain to me why she's being lowered into the sewers via a rope instead of just using those same flight powers? And if she's going to be accompanying the team that's attacking from the sewers, why was she flying up here in the first place? That seems completely counterintuitive. Then we come to the aspect of Void using her powers to teleport this team to the middle levels. That makes sense given that she has the teleportation powers, except she doesn't use those same powers to teleport the third team attacking from the uppermost levels to those levels. They're supposed to just get up there on their own, which is fine for Spartan, he can fly. However, neither of the grifters can fly, nor can Warblade. Now, you can make the argument that Warblade is fully capable of scaling a building like this using his, claws and biometal hands as climbing gear, but what are the grifters doing? How are they getting up there? And even given the fact that Warblade can do this, it still doesn't change the fact that, the Chrysler building is crazily tall, and it would take him a really long time to climb up there. So why would it have made sense to take 3 non-flying characters and make them accompany a flying character who's not carrying all 3 of them up to the top floors? There's so much that's not explained in the way that this was done, and so much of it that doesn't make sense, and it's really bothering me because it's throwing a whole wrench in the entire plot line of this thing from the very beginning. The team of Spartan, the 2 grifters, and Warblade then make it to the upper levels of the building and break through one of the walls to enter the trophy room of the Ipsissimus. Upon getting inside, Spartan actually commends 90s grifter on how skillfully he was able to scale the side of the building, but then scolds him for not waiting for his orders as he should be doing given that Spartan is the combat leader. We also see that Warblade is noticing the helmet of one Shadowhawk on the wall, who has obviously been killed in this future and is now one of the many trophies of the Ipsissimus. He then walks over and sees the head of the Mabulja and asks, gee, I wonder if this is that devil god that the Ipsissimus killed that you told us about. However, the argument between 90s Grifter and Spartan is heating up as Grifter tells him not now and says, I'm really tired of the way that you're always trying to boss me around, Spartan. I've got my combat style, you've got yours. But then they're interrupted by 2015 Grifter. He tells them that they need to stop arguing with one another and that he and 2015 Spartan are so just completely at odds with each other that they don't even speak to one another anymore, and that they used to be friends, and he realizes now how foolish they were to let their relationship deteriorate the way that it did. However, before this discussion can continue, Warblade motions them over as he sees an open doorway and hears 2 people having a discussion. He tells the others to get with him and listen into this conversation, in which the 2 men inside the room are talking about sending one of the men down to the flesh pits to grab that Tereshkova filly. Now, those of you who know anything about Wildcats know that Tereshkova is actually the real last name of Void. Inside of the room, we see the 2 men who we would recognize as both Grunge and Burnout, who have fully betrayed all of their comrades and are now in the employ of the Ipsissimus, talking all this over. Burnout, who is now called, Third Degree, which, okay, sure, says that he hates going down there because he always gets side eyes from Fat Cat and those other 2 sluts, as he puts it, and that he hates seeing their judgmental eyes just peering at him the whole time. However, Grunge, who is now called Suit, tells him not to worry about it, that the 2 of them are on the fast track now, and that they're guys who are making gains in this new world, and that they shouldn't be worried about the past. 2015, Grifter says that he recognizes the both of them as complete turncapes, as he puts it, because they were superheroes, they wore capes, not coats, even though he and 90s Grifter are both wearing coats. He says that they betrayed everyone and joined up with the Ipsissimus to help him in taking over the world, and that he wants nothing more than to give them their comeuppance. So Spartan immediately agrees and says, all right, let's take him out. I don't have a problem with the idea of the 2 of them betraying their friends. That's actually a cool plot device. But again, let's get back to this over here, where Spartan commends 90s Grifter about scaling the Chrysler building. Scaling the Chrysler building! Not only in the attire that he's wearing, which would be completely counterproductive to trying to do something like this, but the fact that they're up like dozens upon dozens of floors and they just waltzed right up the side of the building. Both of these Grifters, one of which is definitely in like his 60s at this point. This makes no sense, especially given the fact that Void has the ability to teleport this entire team up to where they needed to be, as we've seen demonstrated in the previous issue. She can just teleport them at will, so why was that not done? We then get an advertisement for the 2-issue Grifter She Team Up comic, and I do not have either of these issues. I've never come across them in any of my dollar box searches or back issue searches, and more importantly, I've never come across the autographed hardcover editions that could be ordered if you talked to your local comic book retailer. I would love to get my hands on those if I ever came across them, assuming they're not just outrageously expensive, but if they're reasonably priced, for sure I'd buy them. Getting back into the story, we see our heroes make their assault, entering what looks to be a large library-type study, as we see 2015 Grifter yell out to Spartan, telling him that the one in the uniform, aka Third Degree, aka Burnout, is a pyrokinetic and he needs to neutralize him immediately. Spartan concedes and says, all right, one biokinetic force field coming up, and he surrounds Third Degree in this force field, which cuts off all of his oxygen, making it so that he can't breathe and that he has no way of igniting a flame around himself. However, he then tells 2015 Grifter that that's the last time he's taking orders from any Grifter from the past, present, or future, which just seems petty. Like, you have a guy who's telling you specifically what you need to do to defeat this one guy over here who has pretty significant powers that could be used against you. You're neutralizing him immediately, but you're still yelling at the guy who told you what you needed to do simply because of who he is. It kind of just shows like how ridiculous the back and forth between Spartan and Grifter truly is. We then see that Grunge, aka Suit, is doing his best to try and fight back as he lunges forward to try and grab onto Warblade and absorb the metal from his hands to give himself an opportunity to launch a counteroffensive. However, when he touches Warblade's hand, he immediately is engulfed in some sort of electrical field which zaps the heck out of him and knocks him unconscious. At this point, Warblade is confused and asks what happened, and he's told by 2015 Grifter that Grunge's powers, aka Suit's powers, are that he can absorb inorganic matter, and when he touched the living biometal on Warblade's hand, that it apparently just shorted him out. As our heroes leave the room and make their way towards the rendezvous point, Spartan says all that matters is that they're subdued and that they can go on with their mission. However, Reno states that he's actually a little disappointed and would have liked to have spent more time in the trophy room because some of these trophies are actually kind of cool. However, he doesn't realize that around the corner are his own helmet and the helmet of Voodoo that are mounted alongside the other trophies as part of the spoils of all of the killing that the Absissimus has done in this horrible future. Speaking of Voodoo, she and the team of Spartan, Maul, and Void have reached their room that they started out in, which is the harem of the Absissimus. Now, he's not actually using these women himself, he's just got them there to be used by his subordinates. Voodoo is actually quite stunned when she sees this and is disgusted by the fact that all of these former heroes have been made to be the slaves of the Absissimus and all of his soldiers. And Maul states that he's actually pretty shaken up by the whole thing as well, and that he even recognizes some of the women, speaking specifically about one wearing some bracelets that's been around forever and reminds him of Joan Crawford. Now, my assumption is that he's talking about Glory, but she's not depicted in this issue, so I'm not certain. However, before this can continue, a hand reaches out and someone calls out to Voodoo from outside of the panel. Now, I can't tell you that I can name every single one of these female heroes here. I'm pretty certain that this one is supposed to be Nautica, though I'm only guessing. The other ones, without their costumes, if they're just, wearing lingerie and bathing suits with their hair down, it just isn't that easy to tell who's who. And again, except for, if they have a weird skin color or distinguishing physical traits that are not part of their costumes. So if you know who every one of these women are, feel free to list it in the comments below, because I would like to know who each one of them are supposed to be. As it turns out, that hand belongs to Adriana Tereshkova, aka Void, but the 2015 version, who no longer has her powers or her dignity as she has been enslaved by the Ipsissimus. She calls out to Voodoo, who is stunned at what she sees. Void from the 90s approaches and asks who she's talking to, and Voodoo states, "It's you, Adriana." And unfortunately, Adriana from 2015 has a very damaged psyche given the horrors that she's endured, and begins to sob. She's immediately comforted by Fairchild, who is now morbidly obese, as she explains what exactly happened and who she is. She introduces herself and states that she tries to look out for all of the girls up here. However, Void from the 90s wonders how they were enslaved in the first place. Caitlin then tells them that the Ipsissimus stripped them of all of their powers and abilities, and then enslaved them and put them in this predicament to act as basically pleasure servants for all of the hired help that he has working for him. However, before this conversation can go any further, it's interrupted by Spartan of 2015, who tells everyone that his sensors are picking up a familiar power source. At this point, Roxy of 2015, who is now very skeletal and anorexic looking, states that this has to be Troika, who is investigating Adriana because of an unauthorized teleportation that he witnessed, and he wants to know exactly how this was possible. At this point, Void from the 90s has basically had it and states that she will not allow herself or her future self to be debased like this, and she doesn't want these women to suffer anymore. She then states that if Troika wants Adriana Tereshkova, he's got her. At this point, Troika opens the door and enters the room and sees Void standing in front of him. Them, they're one being now, so it's kind of weird. But regardless, they're kind of stunned as they don't understand why Adriana is not wearing the lingerie that she's supposed to be wearing, and want to know exactly, what was going on with the power usage. It is strange that even though they see her wearing the classic Void costume, and they've done battle with her on multiple occasions in the past, all the way back into the 90s, they don't seem to realize that this is the 90s Void. Now, it's understandable that they would not automatically assume that someone traveled from the past to engage them in battle in the future, but it does seem like they should maybe be taking a little bit more precautions than they are, possibly. Void then goes on to state that even though none of the humiliations and degradations that she suffered in the future have actually been perpetrated against her yet, as of course she is from the 90s, it doesn't mean that she isn't going to destroy Troika. Troika is still confused and even notices that Void's power levels are reading very high, which doesn't make sense given that her powers were stripped from her in 2005, and starts to wonder how this can be the case. However, Void interrupts Troika and states, "You're never going to know how this happened. You and me outside right now." Troika again questions, "What do you mean outside?" when suddenly they are teleported outside of the building, and Void drops Troika all the way from the top of the Chrysler building down to the streets below. She then teleports back inside and turns around to everyone else in the room and states, "It's done." We then once again see the exact same advertisement for the internet service provider Netcom that appeared in the previous issue, so I'm not going to talk any more about it in this episode. Getting back to the story, Fairchild approaches Void and Adriana and says, "Oh, you've really messed up now. They're going to really come down on us after that. We do our best in here to try and keep a low profile. I eat like a pig to make myself as fat as possible. Roxy starves herself to look like a skeleton. And Adriana cries all the time because we're all just trying to keep the lowest profile possible so that the men who work for the Ipsissimus don't notice us. which really speaks volumes to how terrible the conditions that they're made to suffer truly are, that they're just going to any length possible to keep from being tortured any more than they already have been. Void, however, states that all ends tonight. She picks up the chin of her future self and says, "You need to get out of here before the bloodshed starts. There's going to be a great revolution, and we're going to make sure that this world is freed from all the horrors that you've endured. So you need to go out and become the women you once were." The team then leaves to go to the rendezvous point, and Caitlin says, "Come on, Adriana, let's go gather our stuff and get out of here." However, Adriana looks at her former self along with Maul and Voodoo and Spartan and says, "I wish I still had the powers that I used to and could fight the way that I once did, because their numbers are so few. I truly hope that they have others who are fighting by their side." On the next page, we find another vertical orientation, hooray, and we see the team of Spawn, Tapestry, and the two zealots moving through the lower levels of the Chrysler building. Spawn wonders exactly why they took this specific path, and Tapestry explains that this is in fact where she knows Marlowe is being held. She realized that because Marlowe is an immortal, the Abscissimus was unable to kill him. However, this didn't sit well with the Abscissimus, so he decided he was going to make an example out of Marlowe, and Tapestry is actually quite worried about the terrors he's had to endure. As they enter a larger chamber, her fears are confirmed, as they see that Marlowe is being punished in the same manner that Zeus punished Prometheus when he brought fire to the humans. He has strung up Marlowe and has mechanical vultures picking away at his flesh day after day, knowing that he will heal every single night and that he will be forced to endure this torture indefinitely. The group is stunned by what they see, and even 90 Zealot seems to panic a little bit in the way that she says, "We have to get him down from here now. This is horrible." And that's somewhat out of character for the way that Zealot normally reacts to things. Spawn then frees Marlowe from his restraints and pulls him down off of the pillar as the two zealots engage in battle with the mechanical vultures. Spawn then brings up an interesting point as he starts to try and comfort Marlowe, stating, "As someone with his own set of healing powers, I know what a burden they can really be, because sometimes you just want the suffering to end," which puts a really interesting perspective on the idea of someone who can heal from any wound and how maybe that's not always the best thing for them, potentially, as we're seeing in the case of Marlowe spending a decade being tortured. Tapestry then tells Spawn that the Zealots will make quick work of the two mechanical vultures, and Spawn states, "Yeah, well, they're making a whole lot of noise. I hope no one hears," when suddenly all of our heroes are turned around by the sound of a very familiar voice and a familiar speech bubble that says, "What do we have here? It looks like the warden threw a party in the county jail." We then get an advertisement for the basketball-themed collectible card game, Fast Break. I don't remember this game at all, and I bet most of you watching probably don't either. I really question who this was supposed to be marketed to. Generally speaking, the type of people who play collectible card games don't typically have huge sport fandoms among them. Sometimes, sure, but not always. And in fact, in my experience, it's been pretty rare. And even if they did, why would they want to play a collectible card game that didn't have the money to pay for the licensing of any actual basketball teams, professional or otherwise? These are all just a bunch of made-up teams for this collectible card game, and the artwork on these cards is really kind of subpar. I really think this was just them trying to cash in on what they thought was going to be a quick fad. That is, collectible card games, as this is the time that Magic the Gathering was really starting to blow up, and nobody knew if it was going to turn into the juggernaut that it still is today. And everyone was kind of just trying to make a quick buck on it. And I'm certain that this game probably failed miserably, and I wonder if they even recuperated the costs that they put into manufacturing it in the first place. Of course, that voice belongs to none other than the Violator, who is accompanied by the Vandalizer, the comic relief, really dumb Flebiac or Flavaic brother, who, just like the two we saw in the previous issue, is not drawn to resemble his previous appearance in any way, shape, or form. He's just a very generic looking type of demon, instead of being made to look the way that he did in both the Violator and Badrock vs. Violator miniseries. He tells Violator that, oh, I'm not sure if someone actually threw a party, and of course, this is once again playing into how dumb of a character he is. And Violator tells him, that's not what I meant, but it looks like we're going to have to rip all of their hearts out and eat them in front of them as part of my tough love campaign. Immediately, Spawn and 90s Zealot go to work battling the Violator. Spawn even saying, I actually feel kind of comfortable fighting against these guys, as he punches Violator through the roof of the mouth. 2015 Zealot then goes to Tapestry and says, don't worry, we'll defend you with our lives if we have to. However, Tapestry decides that that won't be necessary, as she unleashes a massive power attack that actually vaporizes all of the flesh off of both the Violator and the Vandalizer, as Spawn then shields her from her own attack. Spawn seems genuinely surprised when he looks down and notices that the skeletons of both the Vandalizer and Violator are still twitching, and that the two of them are still alive, which seems out of character, as he should know that they can't really be killed given that they're demons. However, Tapestry realizes that she's in no shape to continue fighting either, as her powers have been drained substantially by the attack she unleashed. She states that she's going to stay behind with Marlowe and instructs the two Zealots and Spawn to continue on their mission and meet up with the others at the rendezvous point. As they continue upward through about 10 stories, Zealot starts to worry as they still haven't found the heart of the building. Spawn then brings up that he's worried about the fact that they haven't faced any more resistance and that the Chrysler building seems rather deserted, which worries him. They're then caught off guard when suddenly Reno, aka Warblade, appears and states, oh, it's about time you guys showed up. We've all been waiting at the rendezvous point. He then asks where Tapestry is, and they tell him that she stayed behind with Marlowe. Warblade is surprised by this and says, Marlowe's here? They tell him more or less, and that they'll explain later, while 90s Grifter says, oh good, you guys finally showed up. Now we can actually bring this fight to this future Spawn and hit him hard. As the team starts to enter the next room, Spawn tells Warblade that something is very wrong here, and that if his future self was anything like him, he would have never left his base so unguarded. However, Warblade states they don't have any choices or options now, they have to keep pressing forward, and as they enter the next room, Zealot starts to realize that Spawn may be onto something, as she also notices that there's literally no one here, and that there should be people in this room guarding it. However, they look across the room and notice a stone seat and realize there's someone sitting in it. 2015 Grifter approaches the stone seat and tells whoever's in it to get up slowly and there won't be any problems. However, when they go around the seat, they realize that the person sitting in it is none other than Santini, who is broken, bloodied, and bruised. They asked him what happened, and he tells them that the Absissimus knew of the revolution and was ready and waiting, and that he gave Santini his sight back just to make him watch all of the Black Razors that he had trained die in front of his eyes. This terrible conversation, however, is cut short when suddenly a giant set of stone doors on the opposite side of the room are opened by a very massive individual, which catches the entire team off guard. As the doors open, both 90s Spartan and Maul look up, scarcely able to believe their eyes, as they are greeted by Maul from 2015, who is absolutely enormous. Maul from the 90s is shocked as he can't believe this is even possible, as 90s Grifter states at that size he must have no humanity left, which explains why he's so docile. However, Maul from 2015 waves the team into the room he just came out of, as 2015 Spartan says, well, I guess we don't have any choice but to follow. However, 90s Mall states, yeah, well, if this is what the Absissimus has done to me in the future, then I can't wait to meet him. When suddenly, from outside of the panel, someone says, oh yes? We then get an advertisement for the Fire from Heaven crossover Wildstorm event. I'm not certain that I actually have every issue to complete that event. I really got to do some digging to make sure that I've got all of them. And even if I do, it's going to be some time before I reach that point in all of the books that are required to do the full Fire from Heaven crossover event. So it'll be here eventually, but don't hold your breath. We then get an advertisement for DEF CON 4. I think I have 2 or 3 random issues of DEF CON 4. I'm trying to find more of it so that I can start making videos about this. I don't want to start making videos on this series until I have more of the issues, to prevent myself from repeating the same mistake that I made with Brigade, because I didn't have all the issues of the Brigade miniseries when I started making those videos. And now I'm just stuck desperately searching for issue number 3 of that miniseries so I can finally complete all of that miniseries. So live and learn, that's what I say, and plan things out better when you're starting, because it'll save you a lot of headache in the long run. On the final page of the story, we see that they finally encounter the Absissimus, aka Spawn of 2015, who is very much the size of Mabulja, as he has grabbed Maul from the 90s and holds him in one hand and states, "What exactly do you intend to do to me once you meet me?" As we reach the end of the story, and we even see that 2015 Maul, despite being gigantic, is nowhere near the size of this 2015 Spawn, whose costume is now far closer to that of the Greg Capullo redesign than it is the original Todd McFarlane design. And I bring this up for a specific reason that's going to make sense on the next page or two. We then get yet another ad for Fire from Heaven, which seems odd that they would advertise this crossover event twice in the same book, but whatever. And then we get to the letters section for the miniseries. Now, there's a couple of interesting letters, one of which brings up the issue of continuity and how this miniseries fits into both the ongoing Wildcats comic book series and ongoing Spawn comic book series. And I can tell you, at least from the standpoint of Spawn, it has essentially no bearing on it whatsoever. According to the response that was given to the reader, this book, or miniseries I should say, happens prior to issue number 15 of Wildcats and after issue number 30 of Spawn. But as this miniseries is being released, Spawn is currently in the 40s. And nothing that took place within this miniseries seems to have affected the Spawn story in any way, shape, or form. Now, do the events of this miniseries have any drastic effects on the story of Wildcats? I can't say, because I haven't reached that point in the Wildcats videos that I'm making, and honestly, it's been so long since I've read Wildcats that I can't really remember. We'll find out in the future. Stay tuned. I'm going to keep making Wildcats videos, so, keep an eye out for them. But I have a feeling that it probably doesn't. And the reality is, that's kind of why I don't like these, alternate future stories and that kind of stuff. If you're trying to bring them into the mainline story, they typically don't work. It's fine if it's something like, for instance, the Marvel What If series. That's the best way to do it, in my opinion, where you create a completely alternate idea of what happened. And it's not supposed to fit into the ongoing story. It's not supposed to be part of the actual lore. It's just a fun little side story of like, hey, wouldn't it be crazy if this had gone differently? That's the best way to handle it, in my opinion. Doing it like this, where you're creating this alternate future and timeline and trying to explain it in these interdimensional wizard things, just messing around with timelines because they're bored with immortality. None of it really seems to make all that much sense when you try to think about it. And that's why I don't really care for these kinds of stories. But some people do, and that's why they make them. And then the other letter that I found pretty interesting was one reader asks why Alan Moore never explains the reason for the forces of heaven just standing back and allowing Spawn and the forces of hell to conquer the world, which is an interesting point. Keep in mind, the storyline throughout all of Spawn up until this point had been that heaven and hell were essentially battling over Earth, and that the souls of human beings are actually really important to their cause. So if that's the case, it seems pretty insane that heaven would just be like, nope, we're not getting involved. We're not going to send any angels. We're not going to send the Redeemer. We're just going to sit back and let hell conquer all of Earth because it's not our problem. It really doesn't make sense at all that that would be the case. And it just seems like a huge oversight that Alan Moore made when he was writing this story. And here on the final page, we finally get to the credits for the book. Writer, Alan Moore. Penciler, Scott Clark. Inker, Sal Regla. Colorist, Leanne Clark. Letters, Tom Orzechowski. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Wildstorm Direct, where you could just direct order ash cans for your favorite Wildstorm titles, which is awesome. This is actually a really cool service that they offered, and really kind of like an idea that I wish still existed amongst publishers, where you could just directly order these difficult to find books straight from the manufacturer rather than just cross your fingers and hope that your local comic book store ordered enough copies to get the 1 in 25 or 1 in 500 variant shipped directly to their store. I mean, I understand like that's a way to incentivize retailers to order way more copies, but if they're a smaller retailer, that incentive means nothing because they don't have the money to shell out for, let's say 500 copies of a book when they're only going to sell maybe 10 of them just so they can get that one variant. This to me is a much better way of going about it that allows you to A, not print up way more than you need, and B, give the customer exactly what they're asking for. And that was Spawn WildC.A.T.S Devil Day number 3. And in my opinion, this is so far the weakest issue in this miniseries for all of the reasons I brought up during the video. There are a lot of plot holes, a lot of things that don't make sense. There's a lot of stuff that just feels like there's no explanation for it, to the point where, this miniseries isn't even done and you already had readers writing in to the creators telling them like, hey, this seems confusing. I don't understand why this would have been the case. Doesn't it seem odd that this never happened? Really bringing up the idea that this is not the most well-written story and that it doesn't seem like it's gonna have a great payoff. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may have been really enjoying this story up until this point, and you may think there's nothing wrong with it, that the plot holes are not a big deal, or that everything seems to be flowing just fine, and that maybe it doesn't matter if it ties into the ongoing Wildcats and Spawn stories. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.